In this video, I'll explain why we shouldn't apply inference rules to proposition components. Hi, this is Logic Self-Taught with Dr. Phi. In this video, we will take a look at an error we've seen many times, the error that consists in applying inference rules to proposition components. In this video, I will explain why it's an error. Let us look at a simple example of a misapplication of Modus Ponens. We are given a conditional on its own line. However, the proposition that would match the conditional's antecedent does not occur on its own line. It's a disjunct. In such a case, we cannot detach the consequent and apply Modus Ponens. It is fortunate that we can't apply Modus Ponens in this way, for this argument is actually invalid. Here's a simple symbolization key that shows the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false. Either you owe me $1 million or you're watching this video. This is true, since you're watching this video. If you owe me $1 million, you should pay me $1 million. That's true as well, by generally accepted conventions. The argument form would let us infer that you should pay me $1 million. Well, unfortunately for me, that's false. So such an application of inference rules to components leads to invalid arguments. Consider another argument. Here, the proposition that matches the antecedent of the conditional is a conjunct. Still, Modus Ponens is misapplied in exactly the same way. However, this argument is actually valid. Here's an intuitive illustration of the validity of the argument, but of course you would need to use a reliable method, for example the truth table method, to demonstrate the validity of the argument form. Bob got an A in logic and chemistry. If Bob gets an A in logic, he'll get a BMW. Well, it follows that Bob will get a BMW, since he got an A in logic, among others. In both of these cases, Modus Ponens is applied to a component of a proposition. However, the second argument is actually valid. The first one is not. Both are misapplications of the Modus Ponens. You might wonder why Modus Ponens is misapplied when we obtained a valid argument. Recall, all inference rules are truth-preserving. They are to guarantee validity of inferences they license. Now, if we were to apply inference rules to components, some of the arguments thus derived would be valid, but some would be invalid. That's not good enough. Just as inference rules are to guarantee validity, so their application must guarantee validity also. And since the application of inference rules to components does not guarantee validity, it is always incorrect to apply inference rules to components. You might wonder, however, whether the problem above has to do with the fact that we've been dropping some of the context. We have omitted the wedge and the C. And indeed, if we supplement the argument in such a way that the wedge and C remain in place, we obtain a valid argument. Again, the problem is that in some contexts, such an application of the inference rule to a component keeping the context intact will lead to a valid argument, in other cases will lead to an invalid argument. Here's an example where we apply Modus Ponens to components keeping the context intact, but this time we actually end up with an invalid argument. Here's an illustration. If Anne wins a lottery, she'll be a millionaire. If Anne wins a lottery, she'll go to Boston. Still, it doesn't follow that if Anne goes to Boston, she'll be a millionaire. After all, she can go to Boston for a number of different reasons. This will not make her be a millionaire. To repeat, if inference rules were allowed to apply to components, the validity of the arguments thus derived would not be guaranteed. This is why it's always incorrect to apply inference rules to components. Mind you, there are so-called replacement rules that can be applied to components of propositions, but inference rules can't.